Definition of exponents. An exponent tells us how many times a number is being multiplied to itself. In this case, we have a base, which is 3, and exponent of 4. The base is what gets multiplied to itself, and the exponent tells me how many times to multiply the base to itself. So in this case, I have 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, because I have a base of 3 with an exponent of 4. Working with order of operations, the rules for order of operations is the first thing you need to do is calculate anything inside of parentheses, brackets, braces, or any type of grouping symbols before you do any operations on the outside. So you want to simplify inside parentheses before you move on to the next step. The next thing you would do is evaluate any exponents. And again, if there's an exponent, you need to know that you're multiplying that base to itself the number of times the exponent is. Once you've done the grouping symbols and you've done the evaluation of exponents, then you'll be left with multiplication and division. And you always want to make sure that you're working from left to right. From left to right, the way you read is the way you want to do the multiplication and division, whatever comes first. And then lastly, you'll work with the addition or subtraction. So when you're working with addition or So I want to show you this example of evaluating with an exponent. When you have an exponent on the outside of parentheses with a number inside, that means that you're taking that whole thing and multiplying it to itself as many times of the exponent. So because the exponent's on the outside of the parentheses, you're taking that -8 and multiplying it to itself 2 times. And remember, when you have a negative times a negative, you get a positive answer. So in this case, we would end up with a positive 64. But this is different. Because I do not have parentheses with the exponent on the outside, I simply have the exponent attached to the number 8. That negative is not being squared. So when you have a negative attached to a number, but it's not in parentheses, you have to take that negative and treat it like multiplication. You really have a -1 being multiplied to that 8 to the second power. And following order of operations, we have to do that exponent first before we can So let's start off with a fairly simple problem, but you have to be careful because you see a simple problem and you just automatically start working it. In this case, you cannot start by taking 3 and minusing 4. This is an order of operation problem, which means I have to do the multiplication before I do any addition or subtraction. So right now I would just bring down the 3 and then I would do the multiplication of the 4 times 8. So I end up getting 3 minus 32. Now I can do the subtraction in this case. So I have 3 minus 32. They're different signs. I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to keep the sign of the higher number. So I end up getting a -29. Pause and try. So in this case, we want to do that division first. So I get 24 divided by 3. And then I see I have a -8 minus 8. That's the same sign, which means I have to add and keep the sign, so I end up getting a negative 16. Now we're going to do a more involved problem. So again, when you see grouping symbols or parentheses, you want to go with them first. So I'm going to do the grouping symbols first, which is addition, and then the other is subtraction. And I'm just going to bring down what's on the outside as I work. So I have this 7 times 2, and then I do that grouping symbol, which has 10 plus 2 in it. So I end up with 12, and then I'm bringing down that divided by 3. Now be careful here, because when I do the 2 minus 5, I end up with a negative 3. So I want to leave that in parentheses so that I can see what's going to happen with that sign on the outside. So now I'm going to work with the multiplication and division, and again you want to work from left to right. So I'm going to do the multiplication of 7 times 2. And I'm going to do the division of 12 divided by 3. And then I'm going to deal with that double negative. Remember, we have a double negative that changes to a plus sign. So now that I've done the multiplication and division and dealt with that double negative, now I'm left with addition and subtraction. And I'm going to work from left to right. I'm going to do 14 minus 10, or 14 minus 4, which is 10. And I'm going to bring down the plus 3, and I get 10 plus 3 is 13. So stay organized when you're doing your problem. Pause and try. Okay, so I'm going to work with the parentheses first. And notice here with this parentheses, 3 minus 15 is a negative 12. So I want to leave it inside parentheses. And then I did the 7 minus 3, and I got 4. So now I'm going to work with the multiplication and division. So I get 9 times 4 is 36. A negative 12 divided by 3 is going to be a negative 4, so I'm still going to keep that in parentheses so that I can deal with that double negative. So you always want to make sure when we're talking about negative signs how you work with it. And then that double negative will change to a plus, and I'll work from left to right, doing the addition and subtraction. And my final answer would be 44. So now we have a multi-step order of operations where we also have an exponent in it. So we're going to work with this first by doing the parentheses. So whatever is not in the parentheses, I'm just bringing down until I have evaluated the parentheses. So I have 8 minus 10. 8 minus 10 is going to give me a negative 2. And bring the exponent down with it. And then I have minus a negative 3 times 2. So again, I'm leaving the parentheses around the negative 3 because it's a negative, and I need to know what I'm going to do with that and the signs that are on the outside. The next thing is to do the exponent. Now, here you see the exponent is on the outside of the parentheses with that negative 2, which means I'm squaring the negative 2. So I'll have negative 2 times a negative 2, which will give me a positive 4. And I'm just bringing everything else down. Now I'll work with the multiplication and division from left to right. So I'm working from left to right with the multiplication and division. I have 16 divided by 4 is 4. I have a negative 3 times 2 is a negative 6. And now I see that double negative. The double negative will change to a plus, and I end up with 4 plus 6 is 10. So be careful, stay organized when you're working these order of operation problems, and you'll end up with the correct result. Pause and try. So again, here I'm doing inside the parentheses. You should have gotten a negative 1 squared, and then you should have gotten the 2 for the other parentheses. And now I'm going to do that exponent. Negative 1 squared is a positive 1. And I'm doing the multiplication here. I got 2 times 2, which is 4, divided by 4. And I'll multiply from left to right. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and now I'll do the addition and subtraction. So I ended up with my final answer is 3. So now it is a multiple order of operations with multiple grouping symbols. When you have brackets and then you have grouping symbols inside the brackets, you have to first work inside that bracket to get it to be one number. Anything on the outside you won't work with until you have the bracket to be one number. So inside, you actually have a problem inside a problem here. So the first thing we're going to do is work inside the brackets to deal with the order of operations. And order of operations, I have to do the parentheses first. So I'm just bringing down the 3 minus and leaving that bracket open. I get the 4 minus 6 is going to be a negative 2. And be careful here because I have a 2 attached to the 5 minus 9. And because it's attached, that means that I'm going to be multiplying after I do the subtraction. So I end up having 5 minus 9 equaling a negative 4. So you want to make sure you have that 2 on the outside of that parentheses. Now you're going to do the multiplication inside the brackets because we're using order of operations. And I want to get inside the brackets to be one number. So I'm still just going to bring down what's on the outside using that open bracket. That negative 2 is coming down, and I'm doing that positive 2 times the negative 4 will give me a negative 8 or a minus 8 in this case. So I still want to get that bracket to be one number, so I'm going to just bring down what's on the outside, that 3 minus, an open parentheses, and now I'm going to perform this operation inside. So I have a negative 2 minus 8 will give me a minus 10 or a negative 10. Same sign, add and keep the sign. Now I have it to be one number, but you have to be careful here because we have that double negative. And that double negative means that it's going to change to a plus, and now I can do the addition here. 3 plus 10 will end up being 13. So you want to take your time, you want to work inside the brackets, get the brackets to be one number first, and then you can do whatever's on the outside. Pause and try. So this is a similar problem to the previous. I'm going to just bring down the 5 minus, have an open bracket, do inside the bracket. So I end up with 3 minus 5 is a negative 2. 6 times that 2 minus 4, which is a negative 2. And now I'm going to do the multiplication inside the bracket. So I'm just bringing down the 5 minus, have an open bracket here. I get negative 2 minus 12. 6 times a negative 2 is a negative 12, so it's minus 12. Now I'm going to go inside the bracket still, and I'm going to get it to be one number. It's the same sign, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. Now I'm going to deal with that double negative. It's going to change to a plus, and I end up with my solution as 19. So now when we're working with evaluation, you're going to substitute in the value of the variable given into the expression. So in this case, when you have a number attached to a letter, it means you're multiplying to that value. So when you substitute it in, you want to substitute it in with parentheses. And then after you've substituted in, so I substituted in my 4 for the x, I substituted in my negative 3 for the y, and now you're going to follow order of operations. And order of operations in this case means I have to multiply first, so I'm going to multiply the 3 times 4 and get 12. And in this case, I really have a negative 7 times a negative 3, which is going to give me a plus 21. And now I'll do the addition, and I get my result is 33. This next one you have to be careful with. So again, I have a negative 2y squared, but they're giving me an x value and a y value. Well, I don't need the x value in this problem. All I need is the y value. So I'm going to take the y value that's given, which is a negative 3, and I'm going to substitute it into the expression. So I have a negative 2 times parentheses negative 3 squared. Now you have to be careful here because order of operations states I have to do that exponent first. I cannot multiply that negative 2 to the 3 first. I have to do that negative 3 squared first. So I have to square the negative 3, and I'm going to end up with a positive 9, and then I'll multiply the negative 2 to that, and I end up getting a negative 18. So be very careful when you have evaluation that you still follow order of operations, especially when there's exponents involved. Pause and try. So in this case, we substitute in 4 for x, a negative 2 for y. We evaluate, we get 8 minus 10, that's a positive times a negative, is going to be a minus 10. And then we see different signs. We're subtracting, keeping the sign of the higher number, so we end up with a negative 2. Pause and try. So you see here it's a little bit more complicated evaluation. I'm plugging in a negative 4 for the b. Use parentheses when you plug in that negative 2 into a because it has an exponent with it. So when I do this, I'm squaring that negative 2 and it's going to become a positive 4. So now I'm going to do the multiplication and then the division from left to right. So I do everything else I'm just bringing down. So I do the 3 times 4 is 12, and then I did the 12 divided by 2 is 6. And now I'll do the addition and subtraction from left to right. Negative 4 plus 6, different signs, subtract and keep the sign of the higher number, you get 2. And then 2 minus 5 will give us a negative 3.